Hello, and thanks for joining the Walk Weekly. We would like to welcome a very distinguished guest, Dr. Robert J. Woodbine. And Woodbine is a lifelong Harlemite, and he has made significant contributions in various fields throughout his career. He was part of the inaugural class of the Hotchkiss School 1965 Gold Program. Dr. Woodbine attended DeWitt Clinton High School and graduated from the Hotchkiss School before attending Harvard University in 1965. He later obtained his bachelor's degree, and after a 12-year stint in sales and marketing with Xerox and digital equipment, Dr. Woodbine pursued a doctorate in naturopathic medicine. He furthered his education by earning a master's degree in acupuncture and Oriental medicine after 8 years of study in Oregon. That's a long time. Since retiring, Dr. Woodbine has a clinical practice. He started back in 2015. Since retiring from clinical practice in 2015, Dr. Woodbine has dedicated his time to teaching Tai Chi and Qigong in Harlem through urban QI Fit. Folks, that's QI Fit in Harlem. Additionally, he is an active member of the Harlem Writers Guild and a contributing cultural and literary figure in the community of Harlem. I want to just thank Dr. Woodbine for being on the show. Welcome to the Walk Weekly, Dr. Woodbine.
Well, thank you so much for having me as your guest. It's an honor and a privilege, and I look forward to talking with you.
That feeling is mutual. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell me, how's it going, where you've been, what you're doing, all that kind of good stuff.
Well, it's been a lifelong journey. I just turned 74 recently.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's been a journey devoted to finding ways to uplift folks in the community, specifically focus on their health. The Hotchkiss experience was, I think, the genesis of promoting my understanding of the disparities that we experience as folks in this country. And so for that, I'm forever thankful. But the journey has been a circuitous one, to get me to the place where I'm at now, still in Harlem and still making my contributions the best way I know how to helping people to be self-reliant and self-sufficient in terms of taking care of themselves.
That's fantastic. Fantastic, Dr. Woodbine.
Mm-hmm.
My first question to you is the contrast between back in 1965. I started to name this show Trading Places at Hotchkiss, then with Hotchkiss somewhere in the title, but Trading Places to grab people per se. Because in a sense, it was somewhat, I wouldn't call it experimental. It was a program that they undertook, whether it was experimental or whether it was just out of kindness of their heart or whatever, or they identified a need, which is always a need, all right, for us to attain a higher education. So tell me, how was, if you look at the contrast, would you equate that to Trading Places? The movie with Eddie Murphy where he had these two rich guys pick this one guy, black guy, and they made a bet that he would do well if it was one, he would do bad. Two, that was the bet.
Yeah.
So,
I think
would you equate that with that? Is there some parallels there? I saw that myself, I didn't want to. Yeah.
Only in part. Throughout the history of this country, there have been good people, regardless of ethnicity or so-called color, that have seen the inequities that human beings suffer, and they've tried to make contributions to uplift, those in need. So, in part, I believe that the GO program, the Great Opportunity Program, was out of the kindness of certain individuals who saw a need to try to make a change. And it was also experimental. Obviously, because it was something that hadn't been done specifically by the Hotchkiss School before. So in that sense, it was experimental, but not in a negative sense. The person who embodied the goodness of the intent of the GO program is Father David Paul Kern. He's still alive. He's in his mid-90s. Father Kern was the person that was selected by the Hotchkiss School to go around the inner city schools, grade schools and junior high schools, looking for candidates that would potentially fulfill the promise of the experiment. And Father Kern himself was born in Brooklyn, but grew up in the South Bronx. And I remember speaking with him maybe 3 to 4 weeks ago. let me backtrack for a second. I'm the chair for the planning committee for the 6th anniversary reunion of the Go program.
Oh yeah, that's going to be coming. That's coming up, right?
Yeah, that's June 13th through the 14th. So it's been 60 years since we first became Go students, Hotchkiss Go students. Father Kern was charged with the responsibility of looking for candidates, and they were focused on students from New York, from Connecticut, and just a few from Massachusetts. He grew up in the South Bronx. He was the pastor for St. Anne's Church, Episcopal Church. And I remember asking him about 3 or 4 weeks ago, what was it that he meant by greater opportunity? Because when we were there during the summer, and we were in the chapel every morning, and he would say, greater opportunity means greater responsibility. And so I asked him, Father Kern, what does that mean to you? Because I know what you wanted it to mean to us, but what does it mean to you? And he paused because no one had ever asked him that question in the last 60 years, And he thought about it, and as he was thinking about it, I said, the reason I'm asking you this, Father Kern, is because I want to know, given the historic nature of what the U.S. and the world is now experiencing because of this new administration. Did you, in your mind, have the intent that for this experiment, these students would perhaps not only enjoy the understanding of greater opportunity means greater responsibility individually, but go back to their communities and make contributions, but not just general contributions, but try to make a change politically?
Oh, okay, okay,
And he paused and he thought some more. And I said, "Listen, I know that you know during the time that you were recruiting us that you were very familiar with Martin Luther King Jr. And I know that you were sensitive to the civil rights, movements that were happening. Was this part of your thinking and feeling and aspiration for us, even though you may not have said that and declared that to us directly?" And he said, yes. Of course, when I was growing up in the South Bronx, the people who protected me in the neighborhood were black people and brown people. And I had that feeling of wanting to support the growth and benefit and development of black folks. So
okay,
he shared that with me. So even though it wasn't expounded clearly in the Go program itself, Father Kern's heart was there.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Did they did
And
it? Did they have other recruiters in different regions, like say down south, West Coast,
no,
Midwest?
it was primarily the East Coast, and it was just logistical. The first 3 summers, because there were a total of 3 summers, I believe, 3 iterations of the 3 summers, were primarily New York, Connecticut, and a little bit of Massachusetts. But after the inaugural program ended in 1967, the next batch of students were strictly from Hartford, Connecticut. From Connecticut, New Haven, and Hartford. And the reason for that was the logistics, so that it would be easier for him to do the follow up and follow through during the actual school year. It was very difficult and challenging for him to kind of run around, all of New York and all of Connecticut and some of Massachusetts trying to keep up with the students.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Yes. So the experiment got refined after the first 3 summers, and it made it easier for him to keep in touch with the students.
I know Dr. Woodbine, when I heard about this story, I was, the first thing that came to my mind was trading places, as I said.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
another thing that came into my mind was how did you guys feel your first day, especially when you're talking about you now, your
yeah.
first day attending that program
Hmm.
and ending through that period? Did you face any type of racism? Did you face any
Hmm.
type of negative consequence, negative
Yeah,
I would say indicators, for lack of a better term. But
right.
how was that?
Yeah. So what's important to understand about the Go program is that the majority of the students that participated were students of color.
Okay,
But there were students from other ethnic groups. So we had Hispanic students, we had Asian students, we had so called Caucasian students. So there was a mix. When we got off the bus, the yellow bus,
oh yeah, 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 I understand. Yeah,
and we arrived on the campus, we were surprised to look around and see the majority of us. We all resembled each other. So there was a comfort zone there.
so your transition was very smooth.
It
In other
was
words,
smooth. Culturally, it was smooth as far as the other students that we could relate to. The challenge was, and it wasn't a negative challenge, it was a stimulating challenge, was just getting accustomed to the environment.
Mm.
If you live in Harlem, it's brick and mortar and asphalt for the
Right.
most part, unless you go to Central Park. But Hotchkiss, it's roughly, I think it's about 850 acres of pristine land, and they have their own lake. So that was an amazing stimulus um, for most of us. It was strange for a lot of us. A lot of folks got homesick, and some people actually
Yeah, of
left the
course, of course.
program,
Hmm.
right? The teachers themselves were very welcoming. I think the only stressor that I personally experienced was sometimes the Sunday excursions to the families that generously opened up their homes to us, but sometimes it was just awkward because I never had a room growing up, my own room. I used to sleep on a cot or like the sleep sofa.
Right, right.
Here at Hotchkiss, you get your own room and you may have had a roommate, and then you go to these homes, which are not apartments, they're actually homes, on either one or several acres of land.
Mm.
And, they have children and they have their own rooms and they have an actual dining room. So it was an eye opener
It was a way
to
to
the pot.
inspire your guys to get motivated, huh? I mean, to be exposed to that, I would guess.
Yeah, part of the program was greater opportunity. It was an academic enrichment, but also cultural exposure from their perspective. And
Right.
so it gave us an opportunity to see something that we typically would not have seen, just growing up in Harlem or growing up in the South Bronx. We went to places like Tanglewood, Bear Mountain.
Right, right.
In 1967, we actually they took us to the expo in Montreal. So it just opened up our vista about the possibility of other things that we could aspire to.
Okay. I do want to speak briefly, if you could, just tell us about the Hotchkiss School. What is the Hotchkiss School for our audience that are not familiar with it? I know I wasn't until
Yeah.
I got this project.
So the Hotchkiss School is a private, independent preparatory school from first grade through high school. And it's modeled similar to the campuses of the Ivy League schools. And the quality of the education is consistent with being able to go to college and succeed academically. So you're put into an environment that physically looks like college and academically challenges you like you would at college. So going to college is just the next logical step. It's not this major transition. The captains of industry, as we would call them, would send their children to these high level, prep schools.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw we had ambassadors and high level
Absolutely.
politicians.
Yeah. If you think of the Fords and the DuPonts, that's where they would send their children.
Wow.
Right. So my experience of the Go program for 3 summers was just the summertime. During the wintertime, I was at DeWitt Clinton High School.
Okay.
After my junior year, I then made a choice to leave public school and go to Hotchkiss full time my senior year. So I spent my senior year at Hotchkiss and graduated from there. And my strategy and my logic was that it would be a lot easier to get into the school that I wanted to get into coming from Hotchkiss rather than from DeWitt Clinton. And at that time, DeWitt Clinton, I don't know if you recall, but the um, heroin epidemic was just getting stronger and more dangerous. At the time that we started at Hotchkiss in '65, no one had bars on their windows, but
Yeah, I remember that.
yeah, yeah. But after a while, um, it got very challenging for the community because of the heroin epidemic. So I remember entering DeWitt Clinton as a freshman, and it was fine. But by my junior year, you could enter the halls of DeWitt Clinton, and you would see people shooting up, in the corners and whatnot.
Yeah, I remember those days when I visited.
Yeah,
I'm originally from Williamson, North Carolina.
gotcha.
I came up here 69,
Yeah,
70.
yeah,
And it was kind of prolific out there then. You could see people shooting up and nodding
yeah,
off and all this kind
exactly,
of yeah. Yeah, that was my
exactly.
first experience with that because where I come from there was it's only alcohol and cigarettes. There's
Right.
no drugs down in North
Exactly.
Carolina.
Exactly. So in '65, when I left that summer, we were there for 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I came back to Harlem. I got off the Metro North at 125th Street, 125th Street, and for the first time, as if for the first time, I actually saw the junkies. Now, when you're in an environment and you just live the way you live, you don't see things the way they really are. But having that 8-week contrast, Harlem was just a totally different experience for me. And I saw the junkies for the first time everywhere, it seemed. And that's what created the most impact for me that changed the trajectory of my life was the contrast between Hotchkiss and coming back to Harlem and back and forth, for the next 3 summers. And that's what spurred in me this fire and this desire to want to be of service and make that change for people.
Well, I'm so happy to have you on the show. I do want to just go a little further
Hmm.
and try to contrast that period of time against, let's say, the present time. I said the last
Hmm.
couple of years, the last 8 years. How would you, looking at where we are, where we've been, how would you describe, especially the dismantling of DOE, Department of Education?
Hmm.
How would you? I mean, how do you see what's going on compared to early?
Well, in 1964, there was an educational boycott here in New York City because of segregation. A lot of people don't remember that, perhaps. In 1965, when the Civil Rights Act was um, put into action, the second Civil Rights Act, not the
Right.
one in 1866.
Right.
That summer is when the Go program started. So we had a series of hot summers that preceded programs like the Go program. And so while I do believe that the people who, especially Father Kern, who created programs like the Go program, had good intentions, part of it was a response to what was happening on the streets,
Right.
in the streets, right? So there's always this historic backlash to when we make strides as a people in this country. It happened during Reconstruction, and
Yes.
after Reconstruction, you
Jim
then
Crow.
have Jim Crow, you then have Obama elected, and we've had this backlash. Now, Reconstruction was from 1865 through 1877, a 12-year period, roughly. So the backlash isn't immediate, but it does come back. Obama's no longer our president, but the backlash, we see the fullness of the backlash now.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so there's nothing new. When you think of cancer, sometimes cancer goes into remission, but then it comes back. So this evil of racism in this country historically is a cancer, and every now and then it goes into remission, but then it comes back with a vengeance. So I think we're going through this next iteration of the response to us making
Gains.
supposed strides.
Right.
So the Civil Rights Act of 1866 went through its backlash, and the Civil Rights Act of 1965. So now we're going through that backlash. That's how I see the contrast. The effort is being made to try to make America great again, but for whom, and it's not for those of us who need it the most. It's for those who actually need it the least. So this is nothing new.
Okay. Okay.
This is nothing new.
So, I mean, in the overall scheme of things, how would you say that we're in the same situation as a people that we were back
No.
in 1960s, 65, 66, during the 60s, rather?
And yes and no. It's not black and white. There are elements that are very similar. For some folks, it feels like it's the worst thing that ever happened. But if you think of our parents and grandparents, they had to deal with being lynched, off the et cetera. We're not seeing that, but we're seeing elements of the attempt to try to do that. The student that was just picked up by ICE walking down, from Columbia University, and the other one that was being that's being illegally detained. Those are all efforts to try to recreate what our grandparents experienced. So
Yeah.
it's not as bad. It may feel as bad because there's more media exposure to it. So I think there's a lot more hope if in fact people can cross the false boundaries that they think exist that allow us to then work more as a whole body rather than just sectioned off. Their strategy is divide and conquer.
Absolutely. I did a show on divide and conquer and how it's been used throughout history, especially on the
Yeah, yeah.
military side. Okay.
Exactly, exactly. So there's a false notion that the issue is about black and white. That's an old game that's always been played, but it's really about those that have and those that don't have. And you have poor people of all stripes that are being negatively impacted by those that want to promote this new agenda, which is an old agenda. But because, Martin was, why was Martin assassinated?
He was assassinated because he had too much power.
And his power came from what? His power came from talking about poor people, not poor white people, not poor black people, but the economics of the situation that we were all encountering, so that that strategy to divide and conquer would not apply. And that's when he became most dangerous. Same thing with Malcolm. When he started talking more about the universal nature of humankind and now trying to create a coalition of those people, then that became more of a threat. But as long as you're talking black and white, you're not much of a threat. So I think that there's hope as long as people dissolve these false boundaries and really look at the issues of what humans on the planet really need.
Well, it's been, the Walt Weekly's position that these boundaries are hard boundaries. It's systemic. It's something that I don't see being resolved until we as a people, meaning African Americans or Black Americans, come together as one. And until such time as that occurs, it's going to be just like a cycle. It's going to just be a revolving door. It's just always going to be there.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you in that sense. I think what I would add to that is that we need to cross from organizing ourselves. We need to cross the aisle and talk to other folks that organize themselves. And it's beyond an issue of color. All
But
right.
what I mean, right off the top now, I like that statement that you made that we have to cross the aisle, reach across into other groups. What would be a group that you would reach out to?
I would reach out to poor white folks.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah,
mean,
because they vote against their own interests. So anyway,
yeah,
that's my take, right?
and that's the game that's played. So, back in the 1700s, notion and actually the late 1600s, the way that the division was created was and I mean the moneyed interests, what they did was they created a stratification and they elevated some poor white folks to sort of a middle class status, and so that they could feel better than black folks and have black folks fight with them, right?
Exactly.
And if you remember the Rainbow Coalition
Yes.
that Fred Hampton was cultivating, Fred Hampton talked to everybody. It didn't matter gender, it didn't matter sexual orientation, it didn't matter age, it didn't matter ethnic group. And that's why they got rid of Fred Hampton.
Yeah.
Because the challenge is when you become a critical thinker, when you think beyond the boundaries of what they define um, you to be, and for the most part, it's color based, because race is just a construct.
Yeah, it's a construct.
So,
It
so
didn't
once you
exist
start
at one
exactly,
time.
so once you start talking about the needs of human beings and satisfying those needs, then the inequities become that much more clear, and it becomes obvious that this is not a black and white issue, but it's a have not and have issue.
I'm a little bit astounded by the revelation that you just mentioned, the coalition of the poor whites and Black Americans. That is, I think, something I've been searching for.
That is the key.
Yeah.
If you do this internationally, that's a different conversation altogether.
Wow.
So divide and conquer is a very powerful strategy.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You know,
Definitely.
that's embedded in the British psyche for colonizing the planet. So the opposite of that, or the complement to that, is come together and then move together. What was that movement a few years ago down on Wall Street?
Oh yeah. Yes. Yes. That's and they were
Yeah,
the bull. They were protesting around that bull that's down on. Yeah, I
yeah.
remember it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was a coalition of folks. It wasn't just black folks or just white folks. It was people who want to live life equitably. And so what we see in this new iteration of, cancer trying to metastasize itself again is insisting that we're divided, and all of the demonizing. So as long as you can demonize and you digest that and accept that, then it's easier to keep people separated. But if you don't accept that, you see the picture more clearly and you move more, assertively and more assuredly. And so that's part of the benefit of whether it was an experiment or just the kindness of, the hearts of folks like Father Kern and the Hotchkiss School taught us to learn to be critical thinkers and independent thinkers and
That's
not
one of
just
the
go along
most.
with the crowd.
Yeah. One of the most important subjects that I took in undergrad was critical thinking.
Yeah, yeah,
It,
yeah,
it was one of the most important. I think everybody should take critical thinking. If you haven't, look into, how would you obtain some type of material on critical thinking. I know it's out there. It's got to be a
yeah,
lot
yeah.
of it out there, a lot of material. But critical thinking is very, very important. And I tell
Listen,
my
some
kids, if you read something and if it's not evident within what you're reading that what you're reading is true, rather,
yeah,
then you go to other sources. You need to confirm
exactly.
before you arrive at a conclusion.
And question it.
Absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
authority does not want to be questioned. At the Hotchkiss school, we would, and I learned this at home before I went to Hotchkiss. It's okay to question. Obviously, at home you do it with respect,
Yes.
but it's okay to question because that's how you learn. So critical thinking is important. Something as simple as someone says to you, "The sun goes down and the sun rises." That's not true. The sun doesn't rise and it doesn't set.
No, it says it's in one position. It's just that the earth turns, revolves around.
Exactly. So how many people think about that? And we grow up with that in the educational system. They plant seeds of perception that we accept as being true, but they're not true. And if you question it, then sometimes you're looked upon as being crazy. But the courage to hold fast to your perception of reality and truth is what's being challenged now.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, when, the first time this administration was in office, they wanted us to accept alternative facts. That doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
Facts are facts. They're not alternative. So the language and the ability to try to have us slowly accept this new reality that they want to impose, if we question that, that's when the real struggle and that's where the real revolution is. But it starts with you individually and your ability to be a critical thinker and self-referenced and be able to have the courage to speak the truth and live the truth. That's got nothing to do with color. That's got to do with your spiritual content as a human being. And so when we see what we see from this administration, and it's this cancer that's trying to metastasize itself again, it's a spiritual issue. It's dark versus light. It's not black versus white.
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Yeah.
do want to spend a little time talking about what you're doing now
Hmm.
with Tai Chi Kwan.
Tai
And
Chi.
can you pronounce that for me?
Yeah, I'm going to help you out a little bit.
Please, please.
It's Tai Chi Chuan
Oh,
and Qi Gong.
okay, Qigong.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
So
you have
Tai Chi
a,
Chuan and I'm
uh
sorry, go ahead.
no, you have a company or you have an entity that you work out of
Yeah, Urban
in
Chi
Harlem?
Fit.
Urban Q.
Urban Chi,
Yeah.
QI, yeah, QI is pronounced Chi.
How would people contact you? I'm going to put this in the show notes.
They can email me at Urban Chi Fit. That's you. That would be the most direct way to reach me. And Urban Chi Fit is an outgrowth of my journey in trying to find ways to uplift those that I come in contact with. You know, in 65, when I got off that train from the Hotchkiss summer program and I came back to Harlem, and now I'm 14 years old. My thought was the problem is the environment. So I had this dream to become an architect and an urban planner to change the environment because at that time I thought, well, if I can help change the environment where people live, then they'll feel better psychologically and behave better. So that's a 14-year-old thinking that way. When I got to Harvard, before I got to Harvard, they had an undergraduate degree program in urban planning and architecture, which is why I wanted to go there. When
Okay.
I got there, they had abolished it and only made it a graduate degree program. So now I had to kind of wait 4 years to try to do and study what I wanted to study. So that didn't happen. I then, 1970, I was back in Harlem for a year. I took a year off from Harvard and I studied and worked with Sonia Sanchez at the County Cullen Writers Workshop for a year.
Oh, okay.
So that was all part of the Black arts movement. And at that time, my feeling had matured to thinking about making change through arts. And so if I can change people's mind and how they think by the words that I share, then that would be the way to do it. So I went through that process. When I became a father, which is why I left Harvard my junior year, I
Right.
went to work at General Motors on the assembly line in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
the reality of having to pay the bills, I forgot about trying to be a revolutionary.
Yeah, those were prime jobs, working on the assembly
Exactly.
line back then.
Exactly. So I went through another iteration, and throughout all this process, I had been influenced by my grandmother, my mother, and my father, who were healers in their own right. And I started shifting and becoming more aware of the essence of what we need to change, and that's to become more aligned with our spiritual nature. And we have to
Okay.
be healthy to do that. And so ultimately and eventually, I started studying naturopathic medicine, Chinese medicine, and since 1985, studied Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong. Those practices, in my experience and opinion, allow you to be self-reliant and self-referenced in terms of taking care of yourself. It's not a panacea, but it goes a long ways to staying healthy and recovering from illness if you happen to get ill, depending on what the illness is.
Do these require any physical involvement,
Oh,
or
yeah.
are they?
Yeah. So it's the whole body. So if you think of Tai Chi Chuan, you think of a martial art, right? So Tai Chi Chuan originally is from China, and it's a martial art. It was exported to the West more as exercise for health in terms of movement, gentle movement, but its origins is as a martial art. The root of the Tai Chi Chuan is the Qigong, and that's the energetic practices that form the foundation for the physical movements. So my evolution through all of that I mentioned previously has come to, rather than helping people directly, is to teach them how to help themselves. So rather than give you a fish, I
Yeah,
teach you
yeah,
how to fish for yourself.
exactly.
And so that's what Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong allow me to do now.
And I noticed that you associated with the Harlem Writers Guild.
Yeah, that's an outgrowth of, I mean, I still write, I still, perform on occasion. And so that's an outgrowth of my relationship with the Writers Workshop and Sonia Sanchez. And I've been with the Writers Guild for several years now. Published a book about two years ago, and I'm in the process of writing, I think it's 3 or 4 books at the present time that I'm juggling to get
Okay,
published.
excellent, excellent. I would think that you would want to promote your book. Do you the book that you published? What's the name of it?
Well, let me give you a little bit of my clarification on my background. My folks come from the Caribbean, right?
Okay.
So we're a mixture of Colombian, Panamanian, Jamaican, and Grenadian.
Mhm.
So I speak Spanish as my first language.
Ah,
I'm the first one born here in the US from the family, and everybody emigrated thereafter in the early 50s. So the title of my book is Canela con Miel, which means cinnamon with honey and nails.
you're gonna have to text me this information because send me an email. Okay,
I will do that. I will
please.
do that. So it's a combination of poems, short stories, and 1 or 2 essays in there as well.
All righty. Well, Dr. Woodbine, is there any? Now, what's coming up for you? Because I want to try to close pretty soon.
The most important thing for me is continuing my personal journey on being the best human being that I can be, so that by example, I can help people and stimulate them to try to be at their very best. And I continue to do that through the Urban Chi Fit organization by teaching people Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong. I continue to read and to write, or perform and to write, and just staying close with the family to make sure that I leave a legacy that they can follow and be consistent with what I learned from my parents and my grandparents.
Okay, Dr. Woodbine. I mean, I would like to have you back
Look forward to it.
so that we can. I mean, you're a very interesting person. I tell you, you're a walking historian, number one, and that appeals to me because I'm still learning.
Yes,
Even
I'm
though
still learning
I'm
too,
retired and this and that, but you learn something all the time. Every day you're
all the
going to learn
time.
something new. I want people to know that it doesn't matter how old you are, you can still learn something.
Exactly.
Just be open to learning. That's very important. I would like to thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your busy day to talk to us
Thank you.
because it's extremely interesting. I mean, I got some knowledge out of this. I always get knowledge out of everybody that I interview, but yours is the history or the things that you know. I would definitely like to bring you back to this, so we can talk about
Oh, I
some of
look
those
forward to
things.
it.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate that.
people, and that was Dr. Woodbine.